Good day, everybody. It is wonderful to see so many participants already signed in, and I'm sure many more will be signing in soon. My name is Adal, and this is Elizabeth, and we're lawyers at Long Mangalji, and this is Azadeh. She is a legal assistant at our firm, and also speaks Farsi, so will be helping us today. We have put this presentation together because, of course, we've heard a lot about the new programs that have been released for people with Iranian citizenship that are living here in Canada. And we did want to go through that program. However, in addition to that program, we've been getting a lot of questions about what the best route to permanent residency is, whether to go through this program and to see if through work or going to school, there are options for permanent residency, or whether people should be making the refugee claim. And today we're going to go through all of those options that not only talk about you getting a work permit or a study permit, but trying to look a few years down the road as to permanent residency and what might be the best option. And to be very honest, as you'll see at the end of this presentation, the best option is going to be different for everybody, and it's going to really be depending on your personal circumstances. We will be taking questions, and we'll be taking them all at the end of this presentation. If you do have a question, if you look at the bottom of your screen, there is a section that says Q&A. If you can just put your questions in the question and answer, Ozzy will be looking at those throughout the presentation, and we'll be asking them to Elizabeth or myself at the end, and one of us will be answering them. Also, Azadeh does speak Farsi, so if you would like to put those questions in Farsi, she's able to translate them for us. Azadeh, do you just want to tell those people, for the Farsi speaking people?
Sure. سلام به همگی، روزتون بخیر. خوش اومدین به وبینار ما. همونطور که آقای عادل گفتن، یه پرزنتیشنی آماده کردیم که براتون انجام میدیم. در آخر شما میتونین سوالاتتون رو بپرسین، حتی اگر که به فارسی باشه من ترجمه میکنم و از وکلامون میخوایم که جواب شما رو بدن. پس لطفاً صبر کنید تا پرزنتیشن تموم شه، بعد سوالاتتون رو جواب میدیم حتما. مرسی.
Okay, so the way that we're going to do our presentation today is Elizabeth will be starting. She will be going through the new program and talking about some of the economic pathways to permanent residency that this can open up. And then I will be focusing on some of the family-based sponsorship programs. And also I will be talking about the refugee process. So without further ado, Elizabeth.
Great. Okay, let me just share my slides here. All right. So let's talk about, first of all, the new temporary process that just came into place. So what the government did is they set out a policy, but it's very specific, and it's only for people who are in Canada with temporary resident status. So if you're an Iranian citizen, you have temporary resident status, visitor status, study permits, or a work permit, and the work permit and the study permit have to actually confer the temporary status. Then you can apply for an open work permit or study permit in Canada. Okay. Now, just wanted to go over what actually that means. So some people, if you have been in Canada with temporary status and it was going to expire and you applied to extend it before it expired, that means that you have implied status or maintained status. In that case, you still have valid temporary status, and you could either go back and sort of amend your application if you wanted to, or also you could apply as well for your study permit or work permit. If, however, you are in restoration, so restoration is an opportunity for someone, if your status has expired, to apply to restore your status if you are within 90 days of the status being expired, okay? You can apply for restoration of status, but that is not temporary status. And so on the IRCC website, it does not allow you to apply directly for the work permit or study permit in this sense. You have to first restore your status, and then once you gain back your status, then you can apply for the study permit or work permit, okay? And again, this is for people who are currently in Canada. If you're outside of Canada, if you have a visa, you can come into Canada, then you have temporary status and you can do this, but you can't apply outside of Canada. Now, and the government fees are waived as well for this, okay? So now, having talked about this, this is a fairly simple process. It's a fantastic process, which will allow a lot of people to get the open work permits, for example, where you might not have qualified for it before. But what do you do with that? Because again, this work permit is still temporary, right? So what we're going to do now is we're going to talk more about permanent residence. I'm going to first talk about the economic categories, and then Otto will be speaking briefly about spousal sponsorship, and then going through the refugee claim system. And he's going to be doing some comparisons between applying under other categories and the refugee system, okay? Okay, so first of all, many of you probably already have heard about the express entry system, but I just wanted to make sure that you all understand exactly how the system works. So basically, to qualify for express entry, first you have to create an online profile. And you get to create an online profile if you qualify under one of three categories: the Federal Skilled Worker class, Canadian Experience class, and the Federal Skilled Trades class, okay? The Federal Skilled Worker class is something where you may qualify for it even if you didn't have the work experience in Canada. If you have work experience outside of Canada, and there's a whole bunch of criteria that we can see whether or not you qualify under that, then you could still qualify under the Federal Skilled Worker class. The Canadian Experience class is very specific, and it requires you to have at least 1 year of high-skilled work experience in Canada. That is not when you are a full-time student and not when you are self-employed. Now, whether or not you qualify under the Federal Skilled Worker class or the Canadian Experience class, sometimes it matters, sometimes it doesn't. So pre-COVID, it really didn't matter how you qualified. If you qualified, you could get through. During COVID, for a long period of time, the government was only inviting people under the Canadian Experience class. And then afterwards, they stopped. And then in 2022, they started inviting everyone in the pool again, okay? So, so that's how you get into the pool. Now, just because you get into the pool, it does not mean that you actually have applied, okay? When you get into the pool, you will get a series of points called the Comprehensive Ranking System, CRS points. That's based on your background. And also if you have a provincial nomination that is related to express entry. And we'll talk about that in a moment, okay? And then what happens is every maybe couple weeks or so, the government has a draw where they invite people who are in the pool. It's only if you get that invitation to apply that you can actually apply. So just because you get into the pool, it doesn't mean you have applied for permanent residence. You may or may not ever get to apply. You can only apply if you get the invitation to apply. If you are in the pool, you don't get invited for a year, then you are kicked out of the pool. Okay. So how do you get the points to get an invitation to apply? So the first thing, one of the major things is age. You know, once you get to your 30s, it's every birthday is no longer a happy birthday with regard to express entry, unfortunately. In your 30s, every year it's -5, -6. In your 40s, it's -10, -11. And by the time you're 45, the good thing is you don't have to worry about age anymore. The bad thing is you don't get any points for age. Okay, so not a lot you can do about age except to apply earlier when you're younger. Education, if you have a post-secondary program that's at least 3 years, and then you have one more post-secondary program, that really makes you jump in your points. Language. If you do not have, especially, you know, depending on your age, or if you don't have work experience in Canada, then we really, the language points that will really give you that jump is if you have at least a 7 in reading, writing, and listening and speaking in IELTS, and an 8 in listening. Okay, CELPIP will be a 9 in every single level. That means that you're at the CLB 9, and that will make your points jump. Relevant Canadian work experience. So this is very important. This is the same kind of work experience that I described for the Canadian experience class. So this kind of work experience has to be in Canada, has to be high skilled, and it has to be something where you are employed. So if you are self-employed, if you manage your own business, or you especially if you control and manage your own business, even if you issue yourself a payroll stuff, that still means that you're self-employed. So the work experience, you're looking at working for a Canadian business that's where you'll get your T4, so you make sure that you actually get on proper payroll, and you get your T4. That means that it's not self-employed, as long as you don't control your business. The work experience also has to be when you're not a full-time student in Canada as well. Foreign work experience, high-skilled work experience outside of Canada in the last 10 years can count for points. Spouses, education, language, Canadian work experience, that can add a little bit or take a little bit away. But for the most part, it's the principal applicant's background that really makes a big difference. Provincial nominee programs. So how provincial, and we're going to talk about that in a second, but there are two kinds of provincial nominee programs. There are express entry linked provincial nominee programs, whereas if you are nominated under those programs, that's a layer on top of express entry. So you actually can apply for the provincial nominee program, and then if you get that nomination, you get 600 points added to your express entry, which sort of guarantees that you will be invited to apply. Other provincial nominee programs are not express entry linked. So even if you get nominated under those programs, you don't go through express entry, you go a separate route to get your permanent residence. If you previously studied in Canada in a public college or university, you can get points. Arranged employment. So unfortunately, arranged employment points are not conferred to people who have open work permits. So the work permits that is for the new public policy, that will not allow you to have arranged employment. You can only get arranged employment if you have an LMIA, or if you have an employer-specific work permit that doesn't require LMIA, and you work in that position for a year. Okay. If you have brothers or sisters or Canadians or permanent residents in Canada, you get points. Fluency in French will give you a lot of points. Trade certification, not very many people have that. That's for people who are in like the construction trades and they get certain kind of certification in the province, and cooks and chefs as well. They have certain provincial certification. Okay. All right. So, taking a look at that, some of you guys may be in a good position, especially if you have worked in Canada for a year. Other people may not. And it's very difficult to predict really who's going to go through, who's not. A couple years ago, we could have said, okay, well, somebody has so and so such points. I don't think you might have a good chance to get through. And then all of a sudden in 2021, for example, the government just started inviting, at one point they invited everybody in the pool who had qualified during Canadian experience class. And then they the draws were really low. And then the government stopped altogether, inviting anyone except people who had provincial nominee programs nominations. And then they started again nominating, but then it went very, very high. And it's starting to drop. But the government is also talking now about changing their criteria for draws, such as looking at occupation-based draws, etc. So it's hard to really predict what it is that express entry is going to allow you to do in a year or so. We can make some educated guesses depending on someone's points as to whether or not they have a fair chance to get selected. Yeah, so normally, so express entry is there, but it's not the end all and be all with regard to permanent residence. So I wanted to explain a little bit more about the provincial nominee programs. So every province has its own program. You see, immigration is federal jurisdiction. So the federal government is in charge of immigration, but the federal government has also made an agreement with every province and territory to allow each province and territory to have their own program, and that's called the provincial nominee programs. And, it would take over, several days for me to explain every program in every province. I'm going to explain a little bit about Ontario because that's the province that we're located in and many people are in. But you could go to other provinces, and if you have, especially if you have jobs in other provinces, you may be eligible for provincial nominee programs in other provinces as well. Okay. As I explained, some of these programs are express entry linked, so that if you can, you have to have an express entry profile first. And if you can get nominated under those express entry linked, that's pretty fast. It takes, after you get your nomination, you put yourself into the pool, it probably will be around 6 months processing time under express entry. But other programs are not. So if they're not express entry linked, you're going through the provincial nomination processing time, which normally means around 1.5 to 2 years of processing with the federal government after you get nomination. Okay, so what happens with the provincial nominee programs is you're selected based on the province, but you don't get permanent residence based on the province. The province gives you a provincial nomination certificate. With that certificate, you can then apply for permanent residence. But then the processing time for that is dependent on the federal government. With express entry linked, 6 months. Otherwise, you're looking at maybe 1.5 to 2 years. And what's very important to note is the provincial nominee programs are programs where the province really jealously guard who is nominated, and you need to show that you intend to live in the province afterwards. And so it's not that you can't change your mind for the rest of your life, but especially before you actually get permanent residence from the federal government, you should not be living in another province. If you do, then that province, then where you were nominated, can very well rescind their nomination. Okay. All right, so just wanted to quickly talk about the OIMP, which is the Ontario Provincial Nominee Program for non-express entry streams. So now we're moving away from express entry. We're going to talk about Ontario program. So the Ontario program for non-express entry streams, we now also have a pool, but that pool is very different from express entry pool. So for example, some people, the age would be a big issue with express entry. Well, Ontario doesn't care about age. And it depends on which stream you're applying under as to which criteria will matter. Also, the draws are very sporadic. They happen a few times a year. It's not like express entry, which normally every 2 weeks there's a draw. With the OIMP, it could be several months before they actually have a draw. Okay. So just wanted to go through a few non-express entry streams for Ontario. We have the master's and PhD streams. So if you were to complete a master's or PhD in Ontario, and this is a very good program because you don't actually have to have a job offer once you've completed the program. You, as long as you're not going to go on to do another program after you've completed it, you could then qualify, go into the pool and be selected, okay? Then we also have the employer-based streams that are not express entry. And what happens with this is, first, you have to have a job offer from an employer that qualifies. So if the employer is outside of the GTA, their gross income in the last fiscal year has to be at least $500,000. They have to have at least 3 full-time Canadian or permanent resident employees, and they have to have been in business for 3 years. If the employer is inside GTA, gross income of at least $1 million, they have to have 5 full-time Canadian or permanent resident employees, and they have to be in business for 3 years. The job offer has to be full-time and permanent. Okay, so that's the first thing. Your employer has to qualify, your job offer has to be full-time and permanent. Now, there are 3 other streams underneath this. The first one is if you're an international student. So if you've graduated from a Canadian public college or university, that's at least 2-year program, or if it's a 1-year program, it has to be a postgraduate program. And how Ontario currently, although they may be changing this criteria, currently they are defining a postgraduate program as something that requires everyone who enters in it to have a degree, okay? And with the international student stream, what's very nice about it is you don't need to have any work experience. So as soon as you graduate, you can apply for this. The job offer has to be high skilled, but the salary only needs to meet entry-level wage for the occupation, which is a lot easier to meet than for if you didn't graduate from the qualified program, you could apply under the skilled worker one, but that one, you have to meet median wage and you have to have at least 2 years of work experience in the last 5 years in the occupation. This work experience does not have to be in Canada. It could be overseas as well, but it has to be in the exact NOC code, the exact occupation. Finally, the last one is called the in-demand stream. So for this one, this is one of the only low-skilled categories where if you have 9 months of work experience in one of these occupations are considered low skilled, but they are in demand. So some of the criteria could be if you were to work for an agency that sends you to work at people's homes as a personal support worker to take care of them in their homes. It could be if you were a factory worker, especially outside of Canada, if you're a construction laborer, etc. Okay, so one of the listed occupations, 9 months of work experience in Ontario. the wage needs to meet median wage. Now, right now, it's only the in-demand stream that you have to meet a certain level for your English. The others, you don't have to meet a certain level for English, but you don't get points otherwise. So that could bring down your chances of being able to qualify. And the in-demand stream does require that you have a high school diploma as well. Okay. Moving on to entrepreneurs. Now, I have to say, Canada doesn't have fantastic programs right now for entrepreneurs. We kind of have to cobble together a lot of times different kind of programs to make it so that entrepreneurs can actually get permanent residence in the end. So one of the ways is to use express entry. Oftentimes, if you are maybe a little bit older, or your education, your points, even though you qualify, your points may not be as high. And in that case, what we could do is we could look at getting you arranged employment points. Now, in order to get arranged employment, you can't actually use the Iranian work permit that I described in the beginning, because it's an open work permit. So we would have to apply for a work permit that is employer specific or has an LMIA. One of the work permits we might apply for is under C11, which is the entrepreneur work permit. There's also and the entrepreneur work permit requires that you own at least 50% of the company that you're going to run, that you will bring significant benefits to Canada if you were to open up the business. We can also look at the intercompany transferee work permit, where if you have a company that is running overseas and you had worked for that company for at least a year, and you're going to create a new related company in Canada, then we could look at applying for a work permit for you under the intercompany transferee work permit. LMIAs, there used to be a category called the owner-operator LMIA. That has been taken away. What the owner-operator LMIA allowed people to do was not to advertise for the position, which is kind of silly, really, if you think about it. You're trying to advertise for someone else to do your job in the company, right? But now that's been taken away, so you actually have to do that under the normal ways. There's another category called the GTS, which is the Global Talent Stream. So let's say you had a partner who is running the company, and that company is an innovative company. We may be able to bypass the recruitment requirements if we go through the Global Talent Stream. Okay. Very importantly to note that if you own and control your business, okay, you are not likely going to be found to be just an employee. You would likely be found to be self-employed. And as such, you can't claim those work experience in Canada points. You can claim the overseas work experience points, but not the work experience in Canada points, which may be crucial to whether or not you can get through. Now, you could get 200 points if you're an executive management level, or 50 points for other high-skilled work, which may supplement that. But what's very important to think about with regard to the executive management, which is 200 points, or the 50 points for other high-skilled work, is it matters what NOC code is defined for what you do. Okay, if you are at the executive management level, that means you're like a CEO, and you're overseeing, controlling the entire company. Sometimes you may not be deemed to be at that level. You may be deemed to be at a lower level, where you're not controlling and directing the company. You are more of maybe a middle manager. For example, you're a restaurant manager, you're not necessarily at the level where you are the CEO of a company. So in that situation, you have to be very careful about whether or not you're going to get 200 points for express entry or 50 points for other high-skilled work. Okay, and whether or not 50 points would be enough for you to get through express entry. The startup visa is something that I do like to work with because it allows people to apply directly for permanent residence. You do have to be able to, now you can apply on your own, or you can also apply with other people as well. And you can have up to 4 other founder partners with you for the business. Each of you have to show that you have the ability and the willingness to actually manage an innovative startup business in Canada. Okay, it's not just a matter of putting money into the business. It's not passive investment. You have to show that you are going to manage the business. Now, this business needs to receive the support of a designated organization, either an angel investor group where the angel investors would be investing at least 75,000 into your company, or the support of an incubator. But just because you get the support letter from the designated organization does not mean that's the end. Right now, startup visas may take 1.5 years, 2 years or more for the officer, after you submit your permanent residence, to actually get to your application. In that period of time, it's very important that you actually, each of the people who are applying actually shows that they are actually doing some work on the company. Because if in 2 years, 3 years time, no one has done any work on the company, then the officer can very well decide that maybe you guys aren't going to, in the future, do any work on the company. Okay, so that's something to keep in mind for the startup visa. Startup visa, especially if the other founders are what's called essential applicants, then you basically ride or die together. If you are grouped with other people, then if you are successful, then other people are successful. If you are not successful, even if other people are able to be passed, then you would bring the whole group down. Okay, that's called essential applicants. Essential applicants can also apply for work permits. If you're a non-essential applicant, you can apply for permanent residence, but you will be able to apply for work permit under this category. And then each founder has to be able to meet the CLB of 5 and have minimum savings. So CLB is the language requirement. Okay, every founder in order to qualify has to meet that level, which is around a 5.0 in IELTS and a 5.0 in speaking, listening, and writing, and a 4.0 in reading. And you have to have some minimum savings as well. The provincial nominee program for entrepreneurs. A lot of people ask, because it sounds great. Oh, there's a specific program for entrepreneurs in the provinces. Fantastic. Well, unfortunately, a lot of the programs are not so fantastic. That's because the provinces, after they make you go through all of the application process, will only first give you a performance agreement. That is, you have to say, okay, I promise that I will hire so many people. I will invest so much money into the company, and so forth. And then you have to run the company, and usually after 1.5 years or so, you'll have to prove to the government that you satisfied all of this criteria. After that, you then can apply. If you can get through that and you get the provincial nomination, then you go to the federal government and you apply for permanent residence, which takes another 1.5 to 2 years. So overall, the entire process will take 4 to 5 years. Compared to some of the other programs, it's much longer period of time. The risk is much higher and the investment amount may be much higher. Some people may not be able to go through the other programs, at which point we might look at the provincial nominee programs. All right, Oh, lots of programs to get through. We have other programs that are more regional specific. There is the Rural and Northern Immigrant Program or the Atlantic Immigrant Program. Those are programs where if you go to one of the Atlantic provinces and you get a job with a designated employer, or you go to one of the Northern Ontario cities, for example, that are part of the RNIP, and there are certain cities in other provinces as well. Most of them, though, are in Ontario. And you get the community support letter for particular jobs. And every community has their own criteria for who they want to support. But most of them is you have to have a job in the community. Okay. You also, the government mandates that you have certain kinds of work experience, at least 1 year of work experience that is not self-employed work in the past. So in RNIP it's 3 years, AIP is 5 years, but it has to be in a certain NOC that's one tier or the same tier, one tier above, one tier below usually. And or if you don't have the work experience, if you have a study program, that's at least 2 years, or a graduate, postgraduate program as well. That is a master's program or more. So, you know, what you can do now that you have if you have an Iranian work permit, for example, you could then go to these communities and see if you can find a job there. These programs are great. If you can get a job there, they normally take around maybe a year or so to get through. You also have to have a minimum of language, and depends on which NOC code it is, as to what the language requirement is for that. Finally, I would like to speak to the caregiver programs. Now, the caregiver programs right now, you can apply either for a work permit first, but if you already have a work permit, you don't need to apply for another work permit. And so if you are actually able to work for 1 year, taking care of someone's children in their home, you have to be taking care of someone in their homes, and you have to be directly employed by that person who you're taking care of, or their families. Okay, it can't be through an agency. All right. So if you're employed for 1 year with someone where you're taking care of their children, their elderly, the elderly people, or someone with disability in their homes, you work for 1 year, and you have 1 year of post-secondary programs. So it could be in Canada, it could be anywhere else in the world. That's fine. You pass the language, CLB 5, you could apply. Now, there is a yearly cap every year, 1,100. The one where you take care of children, that tends to be filled up really, really fast. But the other one, where you're taking care of someone's elderly parents, for example, or someone who's disabled, that tends to be open for a while. Okay. All right, Adil, that's all I have so far for the economic programs. Over to you.
Okay, so I'm going to talk very quickly about spousal sponsorship and then jump into the major question that everybody has: refugee or economic programs. But in addition to all of the programs that Elizabeth just talked about through the economic pathways, essentially using your work permit to do one of those, we also say don't forget the family stream, which is the spousal sponsorship. In terms of spousal sponsorships, we have 2 types of spousal sponsorships in Canada: the common law sponsorships and the marital sponsorships. So essentially, the way that this would work is, because you're allowed to stay in Canada for a lot longer than the regular 6 months on a visitor. If you get a work permit or a study permit and you are living with somebody in a marital-like relationship that is a permanent resident or citizen of Canada, then they can sponsor you to Canada. And if you get married before that 1 year, they can also sponsor you. So you can use your partner to be able to stay in Canada for much longer. The really nice thing is that if you do the in Canada sponsorship, you will be allowed to stay in Canada while the application is in process. We can apply for a open spousal work permit for you, or you can stay in Canada on one of these Iranian permits that we've talked about. There's no financial requirements in a spousal sponsorship, but your sponsor does have to show financial stability, which basically often just means that they have a job. Moving on from that, we really want to be talking about the refugee system, which is really critical because that is the number one question that we are getting right now. As you know, the Iranian program differs quite extensively from the Ukrainian program that was released earlier in the year. In the Ukrainian program, there was a few more announcements. One, people were allowed to come from overseas, and they were issuing work permits and study permits to people overseas to be able to come to Canada. So Ukrainians fleeing the war from there. They did not do that for Iran. And unfortunately, it was a program that in my opinion, did not go far enough and didn't do the same things that it did for Ukrainians. In this case, it was very limited to people that are in Canada already. And it kind of cut off all the people that are in Iran at the present time. The other big difference that it didn't do is with the Ukrainian program, they did announce that there would be a path to permanent residency. That path to permanent residency has not yet come, and the details of that have not yet happened. But in the Iranian plan, they haven't even stated yet that there will be a path to permanent residency, just based on the work permits that you get. So as of now, we can't plan except for the paths that we're talking about, the regular routes, the ones that Elizabeth went through, or the refugee claim process. Okay, so it's talking about the refugee claim process. What does that mean? If you just want to put up the slide, Liz. So basically, you would, if you're already in Canada, you would make what we call an in Canada claim. So now we basically just do the claims online. We used to have to go in with all of our papers into IRCC, but now the claim is just done online. Once the claim is submitted online, there's an acknowledgement of claim document that is issued very quickly. That document is quite important because at that moment, you will have access to the interim federal health program. So if people need medical care very quickly, making a ref claim will allow for that. We're seeing, then what happens is we're seeing about half a year to what we call an eligibility interview. That means you go in for a first interview where they just ensure that you don't have criminality, that you're eligible to make a refugee claim, that the person is not a war criminal, things like that. Once you're determined to be eligible, your claim then goes to the refugee board. And right now we're seeing about a year or just over a year to hearings. A lot of people have asked me, are they expediting Iranian claims because things are so bad there? And we're not seeing that yet, unfortunately. The expedited process is very lackluster, to say, at the board, and we haven't been seeing them expedite these, even though the claims are so clear and strong. Moving on to the next slide. It's always important to remember that a refugee claim is quite risky as compared to other applications. And the reason that happens is because it comes with the removal order. So essentially, once we make the refugee claim, we are going down that refugee path. We're closed off from pretty much all of the other ones that Elizabeth talked about, all the economic programs. Spousal sponsorships are still on the table. However, almost all of the economic programs are closed off to you. So one of the major reasons why we're doing this webinar so early is that people are really at a crossroads right now, thinking, do I get my Iranian work permit and work and try to pursue one of the economic claims? Or do I make a refugee claim right now and go down that path? And the point that we're trying to make today is once you choose one, you're really going down that path, especially the refugee path does really close off all the other programs. If you're making a refugee claim, there's a couple of things that you need to prove. Just because things are bad back home or bad in Iran for everybody doesn't mean that every Iranian is a refugee right now. You do have to prove certain grounds. So the first is what we call risk based on enumerated grounds. You can't just say, oh, things are bad, I can't find a job, I can't find healthcare. Those are not grounds for a refugee claim. They have to be based on one of the grounds of the convention. So a lot of this has to do with religion, race, gender, sexual orientation. You have to be at risk because of one of those grounds. In Iran, there are, of course, very strong grounds right now. The biggest ground that we're seeing right now, of course, is gender. Women are all at risk from the regime. They face discrimination that amounts to persecution. They're facing violence and they're facing the threat of violence. So being a woman in Iran is a very strong ground that has a nexus right now. The other ones that we're seeing often are political opinion, and people have anti-government politics and have been expressing those. Those are really strong grounds. Sexual orientation has always been a very strong ground from Iran. People who identify from the LGBTQ community have faced serious persecution in Iran, and it's always been a very strong ground there. And then also religious claims, people who are Christian or other types of religions that are not the dominant religion in Iran have always had quite strong claims. Very quickly, you also have to prove that there's nowhere else that you can go in the country to seek protection, and that you can seek protection from your own state. In almost all of the Iranian claims that we're doing right now, the government is the actual agent of persecution, so these criteria are being met. Next slide. So as we can see, the refugee claim for Iran, especially for women, LGBT, political dissidents, religious or people who are not religious at all, who don't comply with the religious codes of the state, those are all very strong refugee grounds. There's clear evidence of persecution against those individuals. You're able to meet out the test of state protection and IFA because the agent of persecution is actually the government. The major question that we're asking, though, in refugee claims is, will it be the same in a year? All of these are very strong claims today. However, like I demonstrated before, it's going to be about a year to your hearing. And that's the point at which the board member is considering whether you're at risk. It's when you actually have the hearing. So if there is a regime change and things do get better for women, for the LGBT community, for political dissidents at that time, then you could have made the refugee claim, got the removal order, got all the way to the end, and there could be a loss of the refugee claim. So that is the big risk that we're taking, and we're all trying to predict. As you know, it's very difficult to see what will happen to this regime in a year. So the things when you are choosing the path that you're choosing that you want to start to think about are very critical. And I've kind of made a list here, and the list will change for different people, but this is kind of ones that most general populace are thinking about. So the first one that we had talked about is access to healthcare in Canada. The refugee claim process does give you very quick access to the interim federal health program. So if people need access to healthcare immediately, we're getting a lot of inquiries about people who need care for their parents immediately. It is a way to get very fast healthcare. The big question on the refugee claim is that risk that you're taking the moment that you make it is the unknown question that none of us have. Will the regime still be in place a year from now? So you do have to remember that the refugee claim, although it's a very strong claim right now, we don't know if it's going to be a strong claim when your hearing takes place. The other question is, will you get a chance again to make a refugee claim? We are seeing, and I'll talk about this a little more because I know that there's a lot of questions about people back home, but there is an increase in visa refusals that we're seeing since this Iran program has come into place. Again, I think what the government's plan is to do really good things for all the Iranians that are here, to say that they're able to be doing something, and then cutting off more from coming to take advantage of this program. So it may mean that if you're not using your chance this time and you're going back and need to get a new visa, you may not be able to get a visa to come back to Canada again. So a lot of these programs are, I think, a one-shot chance. The other thing to think about is that making a refugee claim can affect your family members from getting visas to Canada. Often, if people have made refugee claims, it makes it much more difficult and sometimes almost impossible for family members to be able to get visas to come to Canada. So it does cut people off that are there. Another issue to consider that I tell people in refugee claims is that if you are successful, you will be a protected person in Canada and you will not be able to go back to Iran, especially as you're still a permanent resident in Canada prior to citizenship. They can take away your status. And so I often tell people that, you know, making a refugee claim is meaning to say goodbye to, you know, the country where you come from and your family that is there. You can meet them in other countries, but it is a big decision. The economic programs, getting permanent residence through them does allow you to continue to go back and see people, and there's no withholding of that, but the refugee claim will mean that you can't go back. The other question right now, and this is kind of up in the air, is can the work you do on the work permit lead to permanent residence if you do a refugee claim later? So right now the government is considering a policy where if you are on a regular work permit or a study permit and you make a refugee claim, that they will stop that work permit, and if you want to work, you have to reapply for a refugee-based work permit. This is quite a problem because the work that you do on a refugee-based work permit does not count towards experience for things like express entry. So it's something that you do want to think about. And then one of the things that we really want to emphasize is, especially if you're doing the ref claim right now, it's very hard to switch, and I've gone through this, to any of the other programs that it kind of is the path that you go down, and you do take the risk of doing it. But as we know, it is a strong claim at this time period. So different considerations are going to be more important for different people as they choose their path. The big question that we're getting right now is, what about the people back home? We did not get the Ukrainian program, and so we can't bring people from back home. I'm also seeing a lot of those questions coming in online. Well, what about my family that's back home? Unfortunately, this program does not look at the people back home. It is very solidly for people that are here in Canada. And in fact, we're seeing, like I said, since the program came through, that it's even harder to get visitor visas and study permits from out of Iran right now. This is very unfortunate. Basically, officers are concerned that people are just going to come here and take advantage of the program, which is a bit silly for it to be a concern because the program was put in place by the government. But this is one of those situations where I think without a comprehensive government policy for overseas and in Canada, that the brain doesn't know what the hand is doing, and it's becoming a big problem. So we're actually seeing it harder to get people out of the country. We've seen refusals for visitor visas, even for individuals that have gotten them in the past. So I think the real advice that we have is, if people do have visas in their passports right now, to use them and not wait, not let them expire and think, you know what, I'll just get a new visa and then come over and take advantage of the program. If you have it's time to start making decisions for people that are back home and coming. Other people who are back home, they can apply for visas. They can apply for study permits, but it is much more difficult to get them on first instance. So if you do get a refusal, often what we are doing now is taking them to federal court, because just the existence of a new program here shouldn't be grounds for not accepting visas overseas. And so it's very critical that once you do get a refusal, that you contact a lawyer right away. On an overseas application, we have only 60 days to plan for it, but we often want to move much faster than that. So contact a lawyer right away. A lawyer can assess the application to see if an error or mistake was made by the officer, and we can take them to federal court to get them reviewed by the court. And often what is happening too is the mistakes are so blatant that the lawyers for the Department of Justice are just settling these cases, and we're getting new decisions on them. Okay, moving to the next slide.
Okay.
Next steps.
So-
Okay.
Oh,
Go
all
ahead.
right. All right. So now that we have basically given you a whole lot of stuff in an hour, just wanted to give you a few pieces of practical advice as to what to do. The first thing is you just have to have a plan. What we're offering you here is not immigration advice. We can't offer an immigration advice to someone that we are not speaking to and really understanding what your situation is. Okay. Some people, they come to me, they write me an email, they say, okay, I want you to tell me how much it is for me to get permanent residence. And that to me is like you going to a restaurant and asking them, how much is it for dinner, right? You can't just, there's no one solution for any person. It has to be a custom-made solution, and you yourself have to really understand the risks and benefits and weigh those carefully. So it's very important first that you have a proper consultation with an immigration lawyer, not a consultant, a lawyer, okay, as to what it is that you should do. And oftentimes, we might have someone consult not only with me and not only with Addo, but both of us, because you have to consider and weigh both of those areas of law and see which one will work best, okay? After you have your plan, then you actually need to execute. And the execution may not be easy. It may not be that we can just apply right away, right? Maybe you need to take and really practice those exams or the IELTS. Maybe you need to get a work permit and get the work experience that you need, etc. Now that the government has given you that opportunity to get that work permit, do not waste it, okay? So have your plan, and then it's execution time. Addo?
Okay. The third is just make sure you stay in status. So many people come to us and say, oh my God, I didn't realize, or I didn't know when my status was going to expire. Remember, you have to be in status to get these work permits. So everybody go to your calendar. If you have one of those old calendars, circle it in red on the date that your permits are going to expire, your status is going to expire. Be very, very, very careful to not miss that. And also don't ever misrepresent on your application. The government is very good at catching it. it could cause serious problem later. The last tip point that we have is if your application is rejected, contact a lawyer right away. For in Canada applications, we only have 15 days, so it's very fast. So these Iranian work permits, and for some reason, if you don't meet the requirements or it's rejected for some reason, we only have 15 days to review them. Outside of Canada, I know there was a question about how long you have. You have 60 days from the date you received the rejection. So although it might seem like a lot, it is a very short time period to make decisions. There are also reconsideration options a lawyer can look at if that might be applicable in your case. But IRCC will only consider one, so make sure it's done properly and with a lawyer. You may also need to file restoration of status. So your timelines are really, really, really critical. Even if you're out, even if you just realized today at this interview that your work permit is expired and you need to do another one, we do have time to put that there's 90 days left. So really be critical about your timelines. Okay, that takes us to the end. We do have about 15 minutes to answer questions, but there are 28 questions, so we're not going to get to all of them. We do have our information here, so if we don't get to your question, please contact us and we can set people up with consultations. We are doing consultations on all of these programs, and we can kind of talk to you about your case. We also can't answer questions that are very specific to individuals' cases, so Ozzy will be picking some of the more general questions to ask us, and especially the ones that are kind of getting repeated. And either Elizabeth or I will try to answer as many as we can, but a lot of them we may say, deal with in consultations. So you want to pick some of them?
Yeah, and also if you did attend this webinar, you want to do a consultation with us, do let us know that you attended the webinar and we will give you the discount for the consultation as well. Okay.
Okay, I guess one of the important questions they ask is, do kids be able to attend the school while parents hold work permits?
So yes, absolutely. So children in Canada, if you're going to grade school, they actually don't even need study permits. They just need visitors status if they're under the age of 18. Over the age of 18, they do need study permits. And if they're applying for post-secondary education, they need to apply for study permits specifically for the post-secondary education. Now, some of the things that you may also consider is that right now there's a new work permit for dependent children of work permit holders. If you have an open work permit and you have a position, whether it's high skilled or low skilled, your child can then also apply for open work permits as well.
Thank you. One question we are receiving is from the students in Canada. Can an Iranian student in Canada with a valid study permit apply for an open work permit and hold both permits at the same time?
So this is a good question, actually, because the application for the permits just came out today, and the way that they're talking about it is, and it's a bit different than the ministerial instructions. So I think time will tell, but on the ministerial instructions, it seems like it's making an exception and that you can do it. But the way that the program is designed right now on the website, it's saying you can either extend your permit, the one that you have, or change your permit. The only example that they give is visitor to worker, I believe, but there's very little instruction about whether if you have a study permit and you apply for a work permit, whether that will actually change it and get rid of your study permit. So I think that question has been put to and has been asked for clarification by a lot of lawyers, and so I think time will kind of tell. Right now, at this point, if you have a study permit, I would stay on your study permit and not be doing anything until that issue is clarified.
And just to let everyone know, the recordings for today, I will need some time to edit, but eventually we will be sending you a link to access them, and they're all accessible on our website as well. Okay, lmlawgroup.com/videos.
Okay, one question we have is, would it be possible to convert closed work permit to open work permit?
Yes, so before you actually do that, you have to consider your permanent residence options as well. Closed work permit will likely give you the points for arranged employment for express entry. Open work permits may not. So there may be some benefits to the open work. You can work anywhere you like, but there may also be some downfalls as well. So do make sure that you have a proper consultation and understand what it would mean to change your work permit. Is it possible to have 2 work permits? Yes, it is also possible to have 2 work permits as well. Ada was saying, maybe you are changing your status or not. A lot of those questions remain to be seen, but it could be possible that you can apply for an open work permit and still maintain that you have your previous work permit as well that's still valid.
Do we need to get LMIA under this stream?
No.
No, we don't need that.
That's interesting about that.
Is there any age limit for this program? 63-year-old person can apply for this?
Yes, 63 years so. Yes.
And can Iranian go back and forth to Iran with an open work permit?
If you go back to Iran with your open work permit, that open work permit is still there. If you have a visa, you can come back. But, the whole point of the open work permit is to allow you to actually work in Canada and eventually get permanent residence under some of the economic streams. Also, if you want to make a refugee claim, you have to forget about ever going back to Iran, like Otto said. Even if the conditions get better, even if there's a regime change, if you make a refugee claim and it's successful, you could get your status taken away if you ever go back.
And we also, just to add to Elizabeth's point on that one, although they haven't said that there is a route to permanent residency through these work permits, if things last really long and a route opens up, it often will be a requirement that the person has stayed in Canada and not returned. So that's something that they're talking about. They haven't announced it yet, but they are talking about the Ukrainian permanent residency route. So often our suggestions would be, although you might really want to think about it because it could affect future applications.
One person is asking, currently I'm in Iran and my visa will be expired end of April. Can I travel to Canada and apply for this program?
If you come before end of April and they let you in the country.
You're the one of the people that in that slide I was kind of yelling at. If you have a visa, use it now, use it before it expires. Don't think that you're just going to get another one because they are getting very difficult to get. Come and take advantage of the program if you can. It's open to you. Do not wait.
Yeah. One question we have about refusal. Are there any timeline for getting a lawyer after refused visitor visa?
So that's what I was talking about. There's no timelines for getting a lawyer, but there are timelines for doing applying in court for judicial review. So we have to file within 60 days for an overseas visa refusal. So it's very critical that you find somebody as soon as possible, because even getting reasons, even getting all of the documentation, putting it all together can take quite a long time to get ready to start the JR process.
Okay, we have time for one last question.
Oh, difficult to
make it good, Gazi.
I don't know. I just want to be helpful. So is language exam required to apply for this work permit? I guess no, easy.
Oh,
Yeah.
You can just apply for it. All you need to be is have status in Canada and be in Canada. Okay. All right, guys. Well, thank you so much for coming, and all the best with all of your endeavors. We're here to help you. You know, if you need any help, and take care and stay safe.